Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's bedtime story. Reading The Little Mermaid the other day really got me interested in fairy tales again, and I thought, what better way to embrace that than to go back to the originals, the Grimm Fairy Tales. And so, tonight, we'll be starting out with a personal favorite of mine, the story of Briar Rose. A long time ago, there were a king and queen who said every day, "Oh, if only we had a child," but they never had one. But it happened that once, when the queen was bathing, a frog crept out of the water onto the land and said to her, "Your wish shall be fulfilled. Before a year has gone by, you shall have a daughter." What the frog had said came true, and the queen had a little girl who was so pretty that the king could not contain himself for joy and ordered a great feast. He invited not only his kindred, friends, and acquaintances, but also the wise women in order that they might be kind and well disposed towards the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but as he only had 12 golden plates for them to eat out of, one of them had to be left at home. The feast was held with all manner of splendor, and when it came to an end, the wise women bestowed their magic gifts upon the baby. One gave virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on, with everything in the world that one could wish for. When 11 of them had made their promises, suddenly the 13th came in. She wished to avenge herself for not having been invited, and without greeting or even looking at anyone, she cried with a loud voice, "The king's daughter shall in her 15th year prick herself with a spindle and fall down dead." And without saying a word more, she turned round and left the room. They were all shocked, but the 12th, whose good wish still remained unspoken, came forward, and as she could not undo the evil sentence, only soften it, she said, "It shall not be death, but only a deep sleep of 100 years into which the princess shall fall." The king, who would fain keep his dear child from misfortune, gave orders that every spindle in the whole kingdom should be burnt. Meanwhile, the gifts of the wise woman were plenteously fulfilled on the young girl, for she was so beautiful, modest, good-natured, and wise that everyone who saw her was bound to love her. It happened that on the very day when she was 15 years old, the king and the queen were not at home, and the maiden was left in the palace quite alone. So she went round all sorts of places, looked into rooms and bedchambers just as she liked, and at last came to an old tower. She climbed up the little narrow staircase and reached a little door. A rusty key was in the lock, and when she turned it, the door sprang open, and there in the little room sat an old woman with a spindle, busily spinning her flax. "Good day, old mother," said the king's daughter. "What are you doing there?" "I am spinning," said the old woman, and nodded her head. "What sort of thing is that rattles round so merrily?" said the girl, and she took the spindle and wanted to spin too. But scarcely had she touched the spindle when the magic decree was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger with it. And, in the very moment when she felt the prick, she fell down upon the bed that stood there and lay in a deep sleep. And this sleep extended over the whole palace. The king and queen, who had just come home and had entered the great hall, began to sleep too, and the whole of the court with them. The horses as well went to sleep in the stable, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons upon the roof, the flies on the wall. Even the fire that was flaming on the hearth became quiet and slept. The roast meat left off frizzling, and the cook, who was just going to pull the hair out of the scullery boy because he had forgotten something, let him go and went to sleep. And the wind fell, and on the trees before the castle not a leaf moved again. But Round about the castle there began to grow a hedge of thorns, which every year became higher, and at last grew to close up around the castle and all over it, so that there was nothing of it to be seen, not even the flag upon the roof. But the story of the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for so the princess was named, went about the country, so that from time to time kings' sons came and tried to get through the thorny hedge into the castle, but they found it impossible, for the thorns held fast together as if they had hands, and the youths were caught in them and could not get loose again. They died a miserable death. After long, long years, a king's son came again to that country and heard an old man talking about the thorn hedge, and that a castle was said to stand behind it in which a wonderfully beautiful princess named Briar Rose had been asleep for 100 years, and that the king and queen and the whole court were asleep likewise. He had heard too from his grandfather that many kings' sons had already come and tried, but none had gotten through the thorny hedge, and all remained sticking fast in it, dying a pitiful death. Then the youth said, "I am not afraid. I will go and see the beautiful Briar Rose." The good old man might dissuade him as he would, but he would not listen to his words. By the time the 100 years had just passed, and the day had come when Briar Rose was to awaken again, when the king's son came near to the thorn hedge, it was nothing but large and beautiful flowers, which parted from each other of their own accord and let him pass unhurt. Then they closed again behind him like a hedge. In the castle yard he saw the horses and spotted hounds lying asleep. On the roof sat the pigeons with their heads under their wings, and when he entered the house, the flies too were asleep upon the wall, the cook in the kitchen still holding out his hand to seize the boy, and the maid was sitting by the black hen which she was going to pluck. He went on farther, and in the great hall he saw the whole of the court lying asleep, and upon the throne lay the king and queen. Then he went on still farther, and all was so quiet that a breath could be heard, and at last he came to the tower and opened the door into the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping. There she lay, so beautiful that he could not turn his eyes away, and he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But just as soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and awoke and looked at him quite sweetly. Then they went down together, and the king awoke, and the queen, and the whole court, and looked at each other in great astonishment. And the horses in the courtyard stood up and shook themselves, the hounds jumped up and wagged their tails, the pigeons on the roof pulled their heads out from under their wings, looked round and flew into the open country. The flies on the wall crept again, the fire in the kitchen burned up and flickered and cooked the meat. The joint began to turn and sizzle again, and the cook gave the boy such a box on the ear that he screamed, and the maid finally finished plucking the fowl. And then the marriage of the king's son with Briar Rose was celebrated with all splendor, and they lived contented to the end of their days. Grimm fairy tales are all rather short, but all rather enjoyable as well, if only for being the classics that they are. I hope you all have enjoyed night one of this, and I hope that you're able to get some good rest. Good night.